Act 4, Fallen Heaven, Chapter 731, The War Above. Lord Pterodon, don't hold back. My plan will work even better if you tire him out. Don't mind any injuries. Orin managed to speak out in short gasps. The clash between Lysander's and Gilbert's eyes suppressed the entire area, a sudden weight pushing on his shoulders. He reeled and coughed from the pain of his organs being squeezed, enduring with gritted teeth and stepping slowly to the center. He made it to the center and slashed his palm, drawing blood. Tracing his finger on the smooth surface, he inscribed nodes and connected them. Please buy time for me. Lysander smirked. You're an interesting one, but I don't dislike one with such fierce determination even to order me. Unlike this one here, he regarded Gilbert with a scoff, showing blatant disrespect. You have a purpose here, but your heart's not in it. I can't tell whether to pity you or to despise you, but you do deserve a good beating for once in your life. Beating? Gilbert's face darkened, his voice dropping to a sudden chill that made Orin shiver, and he cursed at the mistake in his formation, wiping it off and starting anew. The surge of Ein rising didn't help him either, and Gilbert rose, floating in the air. I've endured enough in the beginning. Don't speak to me of what I deserve. I know what I deserve, and it's waiting for me here. Get out of my way, you lowly Talos breed. As the insults flew out of Gilbert's mouth, Lysander dashed in and swung a diamond punch straight toward the chest. An enormous broadsword, wide as a person's waist, blocked with the fist on its side, lighting coiling and radiating on its surface. Strangely, Orin could see everything happening, somehow connecting to the formation laden in the area and granted a bird's-eye perspective. Lysander breathed in and whipped his sturdy leg, blocked by Gilbert's quick reaction and swing despite the size of the broadsword. The faintest ripples of their fight were fiercer than the winds of a hurricane. Gloria and Ren set up barriers of light and darkness, shifting them in and out to repel the slicing winds. As Orin worked, scribbling more of the complex formation, he watched the battle between the two apex grade 9s, a rarity in any age and era. Gilbert formed 6 orbs of dense lightning, the mere excess sparking off flames in the air. He kept Lysander engaged in close combat, which the shattered scion welcomed with a smile, but one of the orbs floated to the side and surged a violent stream of lightning aimed right at Lysander. It swelled and enlarged, engulfing the tall Lysander in a tide of lightning. The other orbs snapped in different directions, surrounding him and firing beams of lightning. Gilbert didn't allow a single moment for retaliation and slashed once, a single thunderous cry erupting in the swing of his sword. An arc of lightning slashed apart the blinding mess of the lighting orb's beams and expanded, striking the floor and piercing the starry sky in an instant. The flash even hid Lysander from Orin's viewpoint, but the shattered scion waltzed out of the puff of smoke, covering his nose. Lightning smells terrible. You could put a little more into your attacks. Lysander cracked his neck, shaking off the last fizzles of static coursing on his skin. His skin carried a slight yellowish sheen, radiating a warm light. His hand blurred, and when it returned, it gripped one of the lightning orbs. He placed it in his mouth and chewed it, spitting out sparks of lightning in disgust, much to Orin's horror and Gilbert's clear shock. "Ah, see, it's a terrible taste, ghastly horrid. Conserving strength right now is a fool's errand. Let me see the true you." Ren and Gloria stood in silence, eyes wide at Lysander. Gilbert twitched and lowered his broadsword with a mocking smile. What was he planning? Orin suspected something amiss and winced as Gilbert let out a piercing whistle that grew higher in pitch, needling in his ears. From the edges of his bird's-eye perspective, Orin saw a large hand grip the edge. It was coated in a thick layer of rust and metal. Lysander, Ren, and Gloria stared at the behemoth that emerged, seemingly having scaled the walls of the dark tower. "That's not fair. Bringing in that thing." Lysander shook his head and sighed heavily, looking disappointed. "Oh, this?" Gilbert gestured toward the Titan. "No, I am more than enough to handle you. He's here for the 3 behind you. I preferred to conserve his strength, but I sense I need to kill them first. Can you keep your composure now, so-called scion?" He pointed at Orin, Ren, and Gloria, his blue eyes glowing with fierce cruelness. "Kill them, It's okay, Lord Pterodon. Orin tossed his space pocket to Ren, keeping his attention on the formation, which had hundreds of nodes and lines written on it. He laughed and praised his lord. We weren't here without proper protection. Our Lord made them for this exact purpose. He clenched his teeth at the end of his words. He thought of Santin and Crag, who might have required the aid in their desperate fight. But this trump card was solely for the purpose of fighting this titan. And they knew it as well and had Orin leave. Ren opened the space pocket and freed 4 towering figures, 11 feet tall and wider than 3 humans. Their simple descent shook the disk for a moment. The 4 champions, the pinnacle of golemcraft, gathered and lined up, facing the titan that strode slowly. Uriah, clad in golden armor and staring out a yellow glow in its visor, raised its long hammer. Mekhl gripped its long sword in a stance, bringing it close to its chest and pointing straight up. The sword flared and blazed in a great flame that reflected and brightened its scarlet armor. Gavuel twirled its trident, a dense stream of water trailing behind its swing. In scaly, blue armor, it stomped forward and leaned its head out, provoking the titan. The last, Rahel, clad in teal armor, walked slowly, knocking its staff on the floor. "Great, great," Lysander applauded. "Those are fine golems. They may not be alive, but I like the fierce stares." "Then Gil, you're out of options. For measly golems can't stand against a guardian. What a foolish endeavor. As for you, you've run your mouth on for far too long." Gilbert gripped his broadsword and surged an immense sign, lightning vortexing around him. A golden sheen coated his broadsword, seemingly the meld, and lightning condensed on his body, shining dense white as an avatar of pure lightning, his integration. An ancestral mark shone on his forehead and quelled the rampant lightning, silencing all to an eerie calm. "You are not born of a great blood, so you have no mark. The difference in our birthrights is a distance you cannot cross. As usual, your words are so hollow. Who cares? All that strength, and you have nothing." Lysander clenched his fists and roared, emitting a golden light that soon rushed back into him. His skin still had the yellow glow, but faint silvery veins pushed against it. He lacked the ancestral mark, but Orin believed the shattered scion's unique anima and integration might balance the odds. On the other side, Rahel held its spear, gusts swirling and amassing into a great hurricane on its tip, and thrust forward, hitting the rusted toes of the titan's right foot. Gavuel stampeded ahead and rode the winds of Rahel's blow, stabbing under the titan's foot, spewing water that made the foot slip back. Even without Orin's orders, they seemed to know the best course of action, which was to knock the titan off the edge. The titan groaned and slammed a hand down. Uriah leaped to the side of the descending palm and bashed its hammer, knocking the palm off course. Mekhl burst in a blaze and spiraled up the right leg, slashing a single burning trail coiling up the leg. "It's really conserving its strength. What does it need it for?" Orin dipped his finger in his bleeding palm and scribbled more, confused about the titan's strange action. It lacked the initial burst his lord had described before. Whatever it was hiding, it didn't matter as long as he finished in time. The titan, aged and rusted, held little fighting capabilities and control other than its devastating swings, perfect for the combination of the 4 champions to hold back despite the difference in raw strength and eye. Back to Gilbert and Lysander. The 2 grade 9s couldn't be seen with the naked eye, the mere glance of their eye forcing Ren and Gloria to shut their eyes while pouring strength into their barriers. Gilbert called down a stampede of lightning beasts that twisted and dispersed in the asteroid field that emanated varying gravity forces. A single one of those attacks could end their lives, but for these grade 9s, it was a mere mild exchange. Gilbert zipped in, ignoring the gravity and beaming straight for Lysander. Lysander clapped his hands, bringing the asteroids hammering on Gilbert and clumping into an earthen prison. He reached his hand out and gripped strongly as the prison of rock tightened and crushed into a smaller size. A strong crackling turned into roaring thunder from inside, and lightning spilled out, slicing the prison in half. Gilbert zigzagged and stabbed toward Lysander's back. Lysander turned fast and met Gilbert's stab with a forward diamond punch, lightning storming one half and gravity containing the other. You must be foolish or a madman. Gilbert's broadsword made loud clanks on Lysander's diamond body, his arms and legs clashing against sharp lightning edges. His words weren't without reason, since Lysander was matching Gilbert's Ein blow for blow, wasting his own Ein against one with an ancestral mark. The boost of Ein and the quality of its sharpness required more to defend and counter. For some reason, Gilbert looked anxious, not wanting to waste his strength. Orin couldn't ponder the mystery any longer. Another group joined them on the tower's peak, a few groaning in pain, covered in blood, not theirs. They must have fought in a recent battle. His attention went to the woman with blonde hair and devilish red eyes. She looked at Gilbert with an endearing smile, and he shouted out a few orders, her gaze hardening with malice at Orin, Ren, and Gloria. Of all people, it had to be Arlena Bluehand, the holy daughter of the Bloodlands. Where were their forces? 3 little rats have scurried to the place where my husband should stand. Bring them before me. Arlena ordered her subordinates, and they rushed ahead past Arlena and 2 other women. Orin remarked at the sheer beauty of the 3 women, one with red hair and red eyes, and the other with pink hair and blue eyes, then shook his head, afraid of betraying Maya, though nothing happened yet between them. He recalled their names, Isabella Lockwood and Aurora Lockwood, another 2 of Gilbert's wives. Ren, I'm sorry. Gloria sighed and brushed her hair aside, standing firm as the enemy drew closer. Why do you always speak so negatively? If it goes wrong, take Orin and run into the hatch. I'll do what I can. Ren pushed his sister aside, his dark sword emitting a black haze. Go back and marry Renee, stupid older brother. Gloria pressed her staff on the floor and erected a dense wall of light, halting Ren. Why do you never listen? Ren shouted. I'm not leaving here. Gloria shouted back. The 2 turned to the enemy that leaped up, brandishing their armaments with deadly intent. Their powers far exceeded Ren and Gloria's. Right before they could breach Gloria's wall, a dragon's roar echoed and weakened the enemy, toppling them back to the second layer of discs. A beautiful woman stepped in front of Ren and Gloria, giving them a charming smile. Her silver hair was radiant under the starry night, and her emerald eyes were full of warmth. Princess? Gloria looked shocked and smiled widely. It's you. You 2 have grown up well. Ren, Gloria. I'm sorry for being late. Celestina smiled back and faced down at Arlena and the others. The rest of the brilliant Drake Empire people gathered behind her, all somehow together, and she raised her rapier, pointing it at Arlena. Ever since the war, I've waited for this moment. I will avenge the lives lost due to your vanity, or I am not a Dragner. Act 4. Fallen Heaven. Chapter 732. Marcus's Cry, the Dragon's Roar. Marcus believed he had endured the worst of blows, most enemies unable to match the brute strength of his lord's power, and took great pride in his half-dragon blood that granted him durability in scales and great violence in his claws and teeth. However, the sudden strike that shattered pieces of his scales off his shoulder proved his pride to be mistaken, the belief in his invincibility broken. It came faster than an arrow and rattled his brain and his skull upon contact, sending him flying and crashing onto the wall. At least his scales prevented the impact from crushing his back. Still, it spread a dull pain throughout his bones. Groaning, he snapped his eyes open, glared a draconic gleam in slitted pupils, and tumbled off the broken wall, landing on his knees. He grinned a toothy smile, the dragon's blood pumping hot in his veins. He could feel the beast in him roaring in anger at the sordid state he had ended up in, but also an immense excitement for the battle ahead. Ever since training in the brilliant Drake Empire, he felt a clearer connection to the dragon within, their emotions and goals syncing well. The Dragnars relied on a spiritual connection to the lingering intents of dragons emanating in the land, bearing a slight bit of their strength. Perhaps that was why the New Dawn had been attracted to that place. Indeed, he too was excited and stood firmly, sending a ravenous glare at the tall figure garbed in a black cloak, who held a great spear out, extending it fully to the side. The ancestral mark beamed an annoying light on the man's forehead. I like it, Sel Standovish. You're an incredible foe. Marcus wiped the blood off his shoulder and regrew a clean set of scales, unblemished and reflecting the light on his black sheen. When he had heard of the powers of this divine enforcer, his draconic instincts told him that they might meet. Tying back his blonde hair, Marcus inhaled and let out a tremendous roar, the world rippling and distorting as the violent cry quaked his surroundings. He stomped and stretched his wings back in a direct flight towards Cell, swinging his enlarged claw. He heard a loud, clear succession of snaps, as if a hammer struck a clean anvil sharply and rapidly. Cell thrust his spear, which was currently lacking the head and most of its shaft, simply a small stick of metal in his grip, out of it. The rest of the spear extended out in a blur, faster than Marcus wished he could see. His grin turned into a grimace as he realized his strength was not on par against Cell's overwhelming spear. The claws on his hand cracked and broke apart, and he pulled back as it pierced his palm, the quick reaction saving the rest of his arm from being skewered. It broke through my scales so easily. My lord, how did you match this man? Marcus retreated several steps, but Cell chased, stabbing dozens of piercing blows in a second, the spearhead snapping in and out. The only evidence of its attacks existed in the fine, clean holes in the ground, the result of pure concentration of speed and power that only destroyed what lay in its path. Marcus rolled and sent out a flurry of his scales that Cell destroyed in an instant, his spear flowing like water in graceful technique, merely glancing past each scale in delicate motions. Speed, power, and technique. Since his body is also made of metal, I can't rule out a high durability. Good, good. As he assessed Cell's strength, his frown returned into a wide smile. The Lord had told him long ago not to lose himself and lead the others, so he elected to be the calm leader, though Santin usually was the calmest. Right now, as Cell's spear descended and shaved off more scales, and sharp platinum threads sliced the air in attempts to cut him, spun by the cubes floating and surrounding him, he saw his own blood dyeing the floor red and felt the urge, the hunger that drove his early days, to consume and devour until nothing else remained. Since our intel noted you as his right-hand man, I assumed you to be stronger. I'm disappointed. Even with dragon's blood in your veins, you are lacking. Cell grunted behind his mask. Marcus flew up and spun, slashing his wings on several cubes. After freeing himself from the prison of threads, he made it back to the corner where Eve waited for him. Marcus! Eve, covered in bandages, shouted in worry. Her blue eyes darted to his injuries. Cell followed and stopped a short distance away, jabbing his spear on the ground and pointing it straight up as if waiting for them to make a move. Marcus couldn't help but praise the man's honor, never targeting Eve once during the fight. While he considered running away, he decided he would not let this powerful enemy run amok and ruin his lord's plan. Looking up, he wondered if Orin had made it to the top and began to create the formation. Surely, the others would protect the young seventh. Eve, we must stop him here. Sorry, but you understand. Marcus brushed her bandaged head, and she nodded, standing up. She removed her bandages and let out the bed of dazzling blonde hair that draped down her back. The years of inaction were great for her, since they allowed her face to return to its former beauty, a gentle pair of eyes above a small nose and flat, thin lips on slightly supple cheeks, and the look of a caring mother. The Lord won't be happy. Eve placed a finger on her cheek, and the flame seal their Lord placed on her appeared, unraveling and dissipating into a puff of red smoke. Flames burst and swallowed her whole, burning off the bandages and exposing her bare body, though most of it had become fire and barely holding to her figure except for the faint features on her face, even her hair whipping around in a great blaze. She wrapped her arms around his neck and placed a gentle kiss on his lips, smiling as her flames, her entire being, merged into him. Smoke fumed out of the gaps between his scales. His agonized screams released fire in each puff, and red swirls decorated his black scales and wings. The heat rippled and slowly melted the floor under his clawed feet, his wings scattering embers with every beat. Red filled his eyes, but he saw clearly. Get away from her! Marcus screamed and dashed ahead, but a straight punch blew away his scales and broke his ribs. Reeling from the pain, he grunted and reached out for Eve, her face burnt and full of blackened scars, lacking any hair. The intruder had slaughtered everyone outside, his mere steps frightening Marcus who possessed a heightened sense of danger. Interesting, the man's voice was cold, which made Marcus shiver and wonder what sort of face was behind the helmet. A brutish attempt at dragonification, separating the body and the precious flames of the volcanic breed and merging them into children. He flipped through a pile of papers. Experiment 76. He referred to Marcus, the one mild success of integrating the dragon's blood and scales. And Experiment 76b. The flames of the same dragon. Is it an instinct for you to protect her because she is your flame? Or is there a deeper connection from being imprisoned here since you were children? Well, metal and fire, not that too different from myself. Shockingly, the man held out a palm and formed a spinning magnetic orb and a flame ball. If you want to leave and live a different life, then go and live quietly. Though I doubt it'd be quiet for that long. Or fight alongside me. I have need of some warriors. Eve shrieked and wailed as smoke hissed out of her orifices, her tears evaporating as they leaked. She spat out flames and clutched her stomach. Flames sparked and charred more of her face. Marcus forced himself up past the pain of his broken ribs and hurried, hugging her in his arms, trying to stop it. But the fire spread and slowly burned parts of her clothing, searing grievous wounds on her skin. He always felt so helpless in these moments, unable to do anything for her. I see. It is as described here. The man crouched and tapped her cheek with a finger. Marcus was about to shout and force him away, but he stopped, stunned at the smoke receding and flames flickering away. A mark of a red flame, small as a coin, emerged on Eve's cheek, glowed, and absorbed the excess. Her cries ended, and she fell asleep, snoring gently with a rare, peaceful look. How? How did you? Marcus looked at the man who stood up, his height towering over everyone he knew. The new dawn had no means of controlling her outbursts. Yet this man had done it on a whim, a simple jab of a finger. What is your decision? The man asked. Marcus glanced at Eve, still awestruck by the calm, sleeping figure in his arms. He gulped and made his decision, bowing his head. I will serve you forever. Please don't take away what you have done. Let her rest. I'm above making threats for potential allies. But betray me, and I will kill you and her. I am Draven. The man turned around and walked away. Marcus struggled on his feet, but followed Draven, his new lord, outside. Marcus flew in, laying a blazing trail behind him. He brandished his claws, flames swirling on the sharp edges, and roared a mighty cry, breathing out dense, red fire. Sel thrust his piercing spear forward, amplified by the power of the chain reactions of the integration. The fire breath parted and diverged in two paths, severed by Sel's power. But Marcus's claw clanged a sharp ring against the spearhead. He gritted his teeth and found his footing, finally matching Sel's strength. Marcus swiped another claw and flung Sel away. As expected, his body is also pure metal. Marcus held his trembling claw, seeing the faint cracks on the tips. I suppose you are worthy of your station. I admire it. Sel tore off his ragged cloak full of holes and tears. A thin armor covered his chest, while his arms and shoulders had no cover, exposing the lean crevices of his well-formed muscles. He cracked his neck and pointed his spear at Marcus, beckoning him forward, and Marcus complied, roaring in full flight. Hurry up, Orin. Act 4. Fallen Heaven. Chapter 733. Astrid's Chance at Revenge. Waiting in Maturz's throne room, Oscar snapped his gaze up, still unable to see past the craggy ceiling of bumps and crevices, but he could sense the powerful Eints clashing far, far above, yet so clear all the way down here. He wiped off the sweat beating down his chin and suspected the two opposing Eints to be Gilbert and Lysander. Lysander's Ein was still fresh in his memories, having faced it head-on in a duel an hour ago. And he had experienced Gilbert's long ago in the library, the first taste of a grade 9's power that suppressed him in front of Celestina. It seemed the bastard Lysander mentioned was Gilbert, who somehow drew the hostility of the Shattered Scion. Two grade 9's clashing. That has not happened in ages. Very few are born to Talos, and even rarer since its gradual waning. Matur said, also looking up, I can see the young one, Orin, the boy you have chosen for your plan. He has allied with the grade 9 of Shatrma and is creating his formation. Your two adopted children are there too. safe and protected by the warriors of your home. Celestina and the others are there." Oscar exhaled, relieved to hear that. After the short meeting, when he saw Celestina's exhausted appearance, he asked Sarah to reach out and message her, asking her to fight alongside them. No response came, but it seemed she made up her mind, thankfully. With her and Lysander, there should be no more issues on Orin's end unless another variable messed up the balance. Emptying his mind of fear and doubt, he honed in on the two Aints, the grade 9s, engaged in a violent clash. His torn body, heaving in pain as simply grasping onto them worsened his wounds. Incredible, aren't they? The foremost of the Exalts, the pinnacle of mastery of Ain. If that shard of mine, Lilith, had intended to kill you all swiftly, then there would be no contest. Pitifully, that shard lost all sense of logic and reason, wanting to sharpen itself through fear and pain. She enjoyed the torture and left you all alive to keep struggling. Maturs grunted. It was an enemy, but its loss is my own. Who in the blazes cares about your feelings, you metalhead? Igniters ignited in high flames. Your other precious candidate ran off with your shard? Why can't you clean up your own mess? Technically, I will. Oscar will be the new me. Thus, he will recover the shard. In a way, I will recover it. Maturs flipped the logic. Oh, I wish I could melt you down, but I don't see any good quality left in that rusted form of yours. Igniter spat a mouthful of magma and fiddled with his rainbow flaming fingers. How is everyone else doing? Can you see them? Oscar asked, cutting off the bickering of the ancients, as amusing and weird it was to listen to. It is all falling into place, Maturs answered. The ancient of metal didn't speak further, earning Oscar's irritation. Astrid breathed in and exhaled, spreading a tide of snow and ice that froze the ground in a wide distance around her. Cracks spread and split the frozen bodies that stood in a sprinting stance while facing away from her. Their gaping mouths that expressed fear and terror couldn't scream as they fell apart, shattering into chunks of flesh. These fools had intended to ambush her, a great offense, an insult to her. Stepping and crushing the icy bits of flesh, she strode ahead, glancing over the strange room. Small geysers exhausted hot jets of steam and water. Cinder cones, small volcanoes, erupted magma, rock, and ash. The two opposing elements mingled and meshed, falling down in a hot rain of smoldering obsidian that dropped at the speed of arrows and dug deep into the blackened earth. Disliking to sweat, Astrid kept her body cool, emanating a faint, chilly air. She couldn't linger here any longer and spotted the exit a good distance away. Her disgust of the messy ground made her stay afloat, her toes a few inches from touching the scorched earth. Where are those ingrates? Astrid closed her eyes as she floated forward, reflecting on the faces of everyone who served the Lord. The boy, Orin, was integral to their plan, but she found no sign of him or anyone else. A part of her wished to descend the dark tower and follow her Lord's path, but his orders were clear, and she had no reason to disobey, not any longer. Revenge was once again on their agenda, and with her Lord's help, it was certainly within reach. So, she obeyed since the promise hadn't been broken. Astrid smiled and ignored the sharp obsidian raining on her, deflected by her icy barrier that acted as an umbrella. Then, she felt the changes in the air, the heat rising to unnatural levels for this room. As the embodiment of cold, she was sensitive to these shifts and glanced around, spotting the source behind a cloud of steam and ash that hadn't combined yet. Someone was there and blatantly challenging her. She raised her hand and swept everything in that direction in a snowstorm, cold enough to freeze any ordinary Exalt. A burning sword blazed brightly in the storm of hail and icicles, a single slash silencing her move. Droplets of water showered on the area, and the clouds cleared, revealing the intruder, too, in fact. The swordsman gripped his sword in an offensive stance, placing his knee forward, ready to dash in. His red hair and eyes matched the nauseating flames burning on the blade. Beside him was a beautiful white horse, bearing a pair of feathery wings and two horns lined down his forehead, one longer than the other, the features of the mythical beast, the Equismus. She recalled Orin mentioning a few persons of interest, including a man partnered with an Equismus. Her eyes radiated an icy glint, and her lips flattened disgust and rage driving her Ein forward in a violent burst of ice and snow. Not even an introduction? The man, whom she already knew to be Aiden Voltin, the swordsman and former New Dawn, complained, yet his arm swung lazily, ending her strike in a single slash. The Aquismus snorted and trotted forward with a yawn, spreading its wings. The feathers burned, and an inferno raged on in a red tide. They mocked her strength, and she'd make them pay for it. There is nothing to say to New Dawn. Astrid stomped her foot, turning the area around her into a frozen wasteland, the geysers and cinder cones shut and buried under several feet of ice. Frigid winds lashed at the inferno and scattered it as embers that flickered out of existence. Former. I'm no longer with them. I parted years ago with well, I guess you could say she's a friend, though that term loses its meaning quite often. We can be allies if you're seeking revenge. Other than that, I have no wish to fight needlessly, Aiden said, looking composed and relaxed, not a hair out of place nor a bead of sweat on his brow. The sheer confidence with which he carried himself was insulting and irritated her. She clenched her hands into fists and breathed out a white breath that spread like a cloud and covered her figure. Former, you say? First, you were a New Dawn, and now you're a traitor. One I despise, the other I despise even more. A twofold mix of scum, with a smidge of a foul bloodline. Astrid didn't relent on the insults, having heard of the Voltins and their ancestor from Oscar. These miscreants went against their ancestors' wishes and believed themselves to be better while committing the most vile acts for the sake of their progress. Foul was the only way to describe the cursed blood in their veins. Aiden's face darkened and seethed hatred out of those scarlet pupils. Astrid smirked and said, "Really? Why is it that my lord attained the one thing you all wished for? Perhaps your blood has become too muddled and tainted that he was chosen instead." A red arc closed in, the burning slash near her eyes. Astrid dodged and spun, scattering snowflakes that clung onto Aiden and the Aquismus, slowing their movements. But their flames surged around their bodies and melted away her snow. Half of her frozen land bubbled and seeped into the blackened earth before hot magma plumed up. She couldn't allow her territory to be taken or else be constricted by the fires. Intensifying the chill, she froze and reclaimed part of her lost land, only to be melted and forced back to the halfway mark. The endless seesaw game ensued between them, and they clashed in the middle. The burning sword plunged into her chest, pain striking her heart. She dodged their strikes by transforming into snowflakes and regathering herself. But the flames burned in her and melted parts of her snowy flesh. Of all the enemies she could have encountered, it had to be the one with fire. Frowning, Astrid layered sheets of ice, 100 layers, and blocked the sword. The Aquismus charged in and pierced her defenses with its two horns, flames exploding and forcing her back. How annoying! This is the worst environment against this enemy. Astrid wondered how her string of bad luck never seemed to end. And it did end. A sharp caw shook the air in a powerful shockwave, and a black crow with 6 wings glided over, ramming right on the Aquismus's flank. She recognized it before. It was the crow that was a good friend of the Lord's steed. Its name was lost to her, but she nodded and thanked it for its timely aid, and it perched itself by her side, lifting its beak in clear pride. At least this takes care of the numbers disadvantage. Astrid sighed in relief and gathered her frost into a sphere in her hand. It exploded in great frigid gales and froze nearly half of the room, trapping it in her winter, the snow piling on and under her control. She looked at Aiden and scoffed. "I'll keep you as a nice sculpture." Act 4. Fallen Heaven. Chapter 734. I'll bite you to death. Something was happening. Crag's ears perked up. The noises and screams of his captors outside incited his rage as he wondered who could have stolen his prey. For many years in this windowless room, he longed to tear his torturers, the New Dawn, apart limb by limb and gnaw on their bones. The hunger imposed on every thought he mustered. Having been starved for several weeks now, no light, no food, no comfort in Restel was missing. He paced and prowled back and forth, hunched and drooling. His rationale slowly trickled out, replaced by beastly instinct, intent on pouncing whoever came through that door. The screams ended. Steps neared the prison door, thick and encased in steel. The door flung off its hinges and dropped to the floor with a loud clank. Light flooded the room and forced his eyes shut, the first blinding radiance in several weeks. He smelled someone at the entrance and lent the lion all of his strength, giving in to the hunger. Lightning surged from his pores and clad his fur. Crag roared like a lion full of pride and leaped in, baring his fangs, mouth wide open. The unnatural hardness between his teeth gave him pause, a hint of thought emerging in the violent storms of the lion's instincts in his mind. Still, he disregarded it and gnawed, trying to chew through this tough exterior. His eyes recovered and regained clarity, focusing on the man clad in armor and helmet and garbed in a deer's pelt. Crag grunted, realizing he had tried to eat someone. The sudden appearance of this stranger was shocking and quelled the lion inside, allowing him to ponder. But the man lifted his arm, somehow unharmed, raising Crag's head higher. Trying to take a bite out of me. Are you more beast than human? If so, then I have no use for you, and you have no reason to roam free. The man said in a chilling tone, one that straightened the ends of his fur, every fiber of his being screaming to run away. Not even the maniacal laughter of Faust and other New Dawn members filled him with such dread. A kick rammed into his chest, flinging him onto the steel wall. Crag howled in pain and tried to get up, but the man dropped a heel on his head, stomping him on the floor and holding him under his foot. I ask again, are you a man or a beast? The man asked, pushing on his head. Crag struggled and failed even to raise his head, the man's strength far beyond his own. The lion inside refused to surrender and took over. He couldn't resist the lion's rage and slammed his claws on the floor, swiping them toward the leg holding him down. The weight on his head lifted, and he rushed up toward the exit, choosing flight over fight. Another man, a pretty boy with blonde hair and blue eyes, a damned pansy in a white suit, stepped in between him and the exit. Crag opened his mouth of lightning-coated fangs and chomped down, missing the other. My lord asked, and you haven't answered. What rudeness! The man scolded him and hammered a black, scaly fist right on his nose, knocking him back to the wall, caving in the steel further. The lion retreated deeper into the depths of his mind, and Crag spat out a bloody fong, slumping down and coughed out. Just kill me, so you can talk. I was beginning to wonder if these documents were outdated. The armored man, who seemed to be the head, judging from how the other bowed his head and stood respectfully to the side, flipped through papers and pulled one out, showing it to Crag. It had his face and detailed information on his powers and previous experiments. You can read as well. Then, I suppose I can't put you down like a beast. Then, experiment 23 of the Predator series. Type, lion, will you join me or leave and live a normal life? I ain't saying anything. Let me see my sister. Crag shouted, afraid of his sister's fate. Your sister? The blond man gestured to the door. You mean her? His eyes followed the gesture and locked on his little sister, standing outside beside another stranger wrapped in bandages from head to toe. He glared at them and growled, rising to his feet and overcoming the pain in his head. His anger flared at what purposes these strangers may have for Restel. He wouldn't let them run amok. Lightning suffused his body and emitted a bright radiance all over. His entire figure now wreathed in lightning. Let her go! As he raised a claw and almost struck the armored man, the most dangerous one that loomed over him. Restel cried out, Crag, stop! They are not our enemies. He snapped his gaze to her, and she shuddered, muttering, sorry. She fidgeted and stammered. I am joining them. Restel? Crag had never heard her decide by herself, always relying on him to make it for her. Her statement stunned him, and he froze, believing his ears were playing a trick on him. Seeing the firm stance of his sister, despite the slightly trembling legs, he grunted and lowered his claw, returning to his human form. In a natural growl, he asked, why? I want to be useful. I don't want to run. Sorry for deciding without you. Restel raised her head, showing the blindfold underneath the shaggy, overgrown black hair. Reminded of the eyes they robbed from her, Crag stomped closer to the armored man, drawing the attention of the blonde one, who slowly clenched his hands. The man waved off the other and stared at Crag, his figure matching his in height. Crag growled, did you deceive her? No, I don't do tricks unless it's against my enemies. To allies, I offer only the truth. Join me, and you might kill many new dawn, or don't and leave. The armored man said, I won't stop you if you reject me. Crag clicked his tongue. And leave my sister? Are you a fool? But if it gets too dangerous, I'll run away with her. You can leave anytime. But if you abandon me during a battle, I will kill you first before the enemy. The armored man said in that chilling tone. Crag shivered and smiled widely. And you abandon me. I'll tear out that lying tongue. If that satisfies your delusions. He waved off the blond man again, who stared at Crag with an enraged look. I am Draven, now follow me. Marvelous Experiment 23. Your parameters far surpass our older projections. The vile Faust sounded elated, his grotesque face still lodged in the chest of the sweeper. His eyes behind the round glasses stared down, the smile widening. Is that Experiment 20 in your shadow? What a perfect combination. Is it the bond between brother and sister? Shall I dissect you both and figure out what other secrets you've been hiding? How did you evolve so much since your escape? Crag crossed his arms and blocked the heavy fist of the sweeper, the sheer weight shaking every bone in his body, rattling them in his flesh. Forcing his rolled eyes back, he gritted his teeth, swallowing the blood rising from his throat. His clawed feet scraped against the room, spewing sparks as the sweeper roared, pushing him for several feet. For a good hour now, he had fought this damned monster, clashing up the stairs and past several halls and rooms. His claws were dull. One of his lungs had collapsed, inducing faint wheezes, and his fangs had been torn off several times by a strong grip and pull. However, he held on, his lightning lion form, having endured the endless thundering storms of the island where he trained, burst in pulses of erratic lightning that coiled and lashed in all directions. The uneven fluctuations of light emitted by his chaotic lightning twisted and stretched a shadow, allowing Restel to reach out a hand and knock the sweeper off balance at any angle. Her support had saved him several times now, lessening the strength behind one of its devastating blows and letting his attack through the gap in its defense. Crag took the chance Restel gave him and clawed on the sweeper's exposed face, streaking deep gashes in the flesh. He had done this many times that the sweeper's face was a messy pulp of flesh, parts of its cheekbones showing, and an entire row of teeth exposed on the right side. It never had eyes to begin with, so that was a moot point. Crag noticed it prioritized protecting Faust in his chest, but couldn't find the opportunity. A fist closed in, and Restel shifted the sweeper slightly, diverting its path, but it still broke off his newly formed fangs. Crag roared and sped up, gathering lightning into his claws and palms, striking the sweeper on its guard and pushing it back. The lightning burned parts of its skin right off the flesh, but the sweeper looked unconcerned, emotionless as always. He wondered if the sweeper even had a rational thought at all. A mindless, murderous brute was all it was. Perhaps he would have been like it if not for Restel, Lordy, and the others. He clenched his growing fangs and swiped his claws, each strike releasing a thunderous boom that deafened his ears. Lightning crackled on the sweeper, but it stood firm. A quick stomp crushed his foot, and Crag howled in pain, struggling to escape. It held his foot down with such strength he couldn't break free. The sweeper gripped his wrists and held Crag close, a mouth of sharp teeth gaping wide and chomping down. Crag swerved his head and dodged the fatal blow as it instead crushed his shoulder. Crag! Restel cried from his shadow through the telepathic link formed by him and her. Experiment 23. Was it the meeting with the perfect Reese user that changed you? Our initial projections had you in Experiment 20 dead way before. Yet you persisted. I'm curious. Answer me. For old time's sake. Faust's glasses tilted, and he couldn't adjust because the sweeper had Crag's wrists, locking the arms and claws. Bastard. You call this a bite? Crag strained himself, knowing his wounds were deep, but he didn't care. Opening his mouth, he roared, filling the air with crackling lightning that crawled up the sweeper's legs. The light glinted off his sharp fangs as he pushed back and bit down on the sweeper, pulling off a thick chunk of flesh. Restel acted at that moment and jumped up, stabbing a short sword at Faust. The sweeper retreated fast, but Faust's scream proved their efforts had worked. You damned experiments! Faust shouted. One of his eyes was shut, and dripping blood from the deep cut that split the eyelid. I'll grind your bones into dust and tear off each vein from your flesh. Is that all you got? Faust, you're a disgusting meal. But it's too weak. I once tried to take a bite out of that man. You're nothing but a rotten meal. Crag licked his fangs and surged his lightning to the fullest. Flashes of light and continuous thunder filling the room backslash. I can only take on so many wounds. Hurry up, you damned brat. Crag burned his shoulder and stopped the bleeding. He couldn't believe he had to leave it to Orin. Act 4, Fallen Heaven, Chapter 735, Orin the Index. Chances of success is 1 out of 13,566. Merging two opposite bloodlines in one person will result in immediate death. His lips moved without his will, forced to speak out what his mind calculated based on the immense knowledge crammed into it. His head ached, and his heart was cold. Orin shifted his arms inside the metal casings and wanted to cry. His first memory had been sitting in his chair, speaking whatever his captors wanted to know. His head was locked under an iron helmet, nails embedded in his skull. "Who are you?" A strange man entered, killing one of his captors, who exclaimed before everything above the jaw was severed. "I am the Index. I have the answers and can calculate anything you wish to know." He answered again, not from his own free will, bound to speak what the new dawn had hammered into his brain. "No, I'll make your name. What is your name?" The man asked. "I am the Index," he answered again. "Then you don't have a name? What were you before they put you in this chair?" The man paced around and rummaged in the files. "Inconclusive, incomplete, irrelevant. Ask another." "I see." The man read a document and took a seat in front of him. His dark visor studied the pages and then stared ahead at him. "Born here, the one successful case of the evolved mind. No name, no parents, no reason to exist other than to answer and please their lunacy. Irrelevant. Ask a question. What do you want?" The man leaned forward. "My purpose is to answer and calculate." "I meant, what do you want?" "To walk, to see the world outside, to be freed from this chair." "There is no need. My purpose is to remain here," he answered. The man stood and stepped forward. He pulled the nails out and removed the helmet. He tore off the metal casings on his arms and legs. "This is against protocol. I must remain here," he said. "This place will be destroyed soon. Your purpose isn't to die in the wreckage, is it?" "My purpose is to answer and calculate. Dying is not among the required functions." "Then, follow me." The man lifted him and carried him on his shoulder. Despite asking to follow him, the man acted in oppression and forceful nature. "Calling you Index is a bother. If you have to answer, then answer this. What name do you want?" "I am the Index," he answered flatly. "Orin it is." The man rejected his answer and came up with a name, from where he did not know, but the name was odd. Hearing it brought a strange sensation to the mind, a weird tingling that warmed his heart, its beating increasing twicefold. "Orin is acceptable. Ask Orin anything, and I will answer." Orin wheezed and stretched his bloody finger, taking a moment to calm the trembling, and tried to draw another mark. The blood had already dried on his finger, so he cut and made a fresh wound on his palm, dipping his finger in the seeping blood like a quill to ink. After a second, he laid a new node in his formation, ever growing in complexity and size, and streaked several lines, connecting it to others close by and far away. Looking back, he noted he was a few feet away from the edge, having started from the center and layering out and farther. "Hold it together, Orin. Hold it together." He clamped his lips shut and endured the numbness and chill afflicting his arms, placing a mark on nearly every level of the dark tower, and then creating the crucial main configuration drained much of his blood, his face pale and eyes dulling with the loss of each precious droplet. But he persisted and started on the new layer, placing all of his focus on completing his task. The crux of the plan relied on his formation, or else all would be lost, and the Lord's plan would be in vain. Strangely, as Orin carried on his work, the field of his vision expanded and became clearer the longer he connected to the Dark Tower's network of Ein. He could see it all. A war raged on below, on the lower discs and the ground beneath. All 1,200 of their people were not here, but a few hundred did arrive. Fenu and the Azure Sea Company, the beasts of Zerit, and the others in service of his lord had joined the fray, clashing against Gilbert's group. Celestina and the brilliant Drake Empire warriors held the line against Gilbert's wives. The four champions knocked the Titan off the floor and pushed it off the edge, buying more time since it needed to climb up. Lightning flashed nearby and nearly struck him, but a strange force pulled the thunderous bolt and redirected it elsewhere. Orin couldn't help but divert part of his attention to the two monsters clashing in the sky, one carrying a smirk as the other frowned deeper every exchange. Gilbert raised his broadsword, clouds gathering under the starry sky and turning black, coursing with lightning crackling inside. At Gilbert's motion, the lightning took on the shape of blades, countless swords capable of stabbing every inch of this area. The thunder of thousands of lightning deafened all sounds, war cries mute, and screams unheard. Everyone stopped fighting and stared, some in fear, some in awe, and some with pride at the terrible might of the Grade 9. Ironically, they shone like the glass crystals of a chandelier meant for the grandest of halls, brighter than the suns and masking the stars from sight. Orin had seen one before in the main hall of the Haven Academy when he observed a great gathering and feast for the graduates. But here, there was no music or dancing, nor the laughter and smiling of the young, hopeful Exalts. Everyone, older than most and survivors of long years of brutal war, basked in the unforgiving light that descended. The blades rained down in a downpour of sharp lightning, with thunderous booms and chirps assaulting the ears as sparks flashed and arced, filling the air with static. Amid the overwhelming light, one man's shadow remained in defiance. Lysander widened his smirk, elation and delight filling his yellow eyes. His body, bruised and decorated with wounds in which lightning fizzled out of the dripping blood, rose higher. Lysander clenched his fist, clad in diamond and pulsating tremors of gravitational might, and punched once. Shards of diamond and fine dust formed a vortex, rotating around a dense, spinning gem. Lysander's vortex attracted the lightning blades and sucked them in toward the center. Dust dulled the edges, and diamonds battered and broke the blades. A series of explosions resulted in quick succession, like the rapid beating of drums. Orin clenched his hand and held onto the disc platform, holding out against the frightening storms that formed in the wake of the two powers' clash. One of his eyes shut, but the other could still see through the thin slit of its eyelids. Lysander stepped back several steps and hunched forward, gripping a lightning blade that stuck out from his shoulder. In fact, he had been stabbed by several. On the other side, Gilbert had a few scrapes on his annoyingly handsome face, lacking any serious injuries. However, the ancestral mark was duller than before. Boring, Lysander said, spitting out blood that crackled with lightning, turning into smoke in midair. He lost his smile and stared at Gilbert, signing in clear disappointment. Your heart's not in the fight. You're more anxious than I am, and you have the advantage. Constantly glancing at that large golem and that guy in the center, distracted during our fight? I won't even need whatever they have planned to win. His back faced Orin. Dirt and rocks floated and formed words, hidden to Gilbert, but not to him. Hurry up, the rock said. Orin slapped his own cheeks to concentrate and carried on. Gilbert's enraged shout diminished and muffled as Orin ignored the happenings around him, drawn into the intricate world he was creating. All meaningless distractions departed from his mind and no longer led his thoughts astray. His hand moved fast, driven by the single-minded purpose. This formation was the end of all they had worked toward, and he saw it to be the new beginning. His lord, Marcus, Eve, Santin, Crag, Restel, Astrid, and more depended on him. The world turned silent and dark, his red formation shining clearer and thriving. Orin dragged his knees and encircled the formation, finishing the latest layer, the shape and form nearly complete. A hint of pride welled up in him. He was accomplishing what so many had failed to do before, with countless pioneers and prodigies falling short of his creation. Anytime someone spoke of formations, the first thought of anyone listening would naturally be the city formations that defended them. That was all they were good for, according to common sense, a notion he denied and sought to defy. Formations often had three functions: slaughter, defend, or enhance. Cities used veins of iron to power the defense formations, and airships and structures depended on concentrated crystals of iron or an immense supply for it. Slaughter formations were utterly useless, too easy to spot and stationary, unable to be placed on a moving airship for a direct collision. An unassuming army might be culled by the rampant iron of such a formation, but wars saw little success as people struck down the nodes with ease. Enhancing formations had more versatility, but required an immense amount of resources and often overwhelmed the people meant to benefit from it. All three types were horrid. Orin grinned, starting on the final layer, inscribing the last nodes of the newest formation in existence, the spell formation. Golems and weapons had intricate cores that allowed the use of certain abilities if the right components had been used, but formations could not invoke a spell until now. He traced his finger and connected two nodes, forgetting the numbness freezing his hand. The excitement, the delight, overwhelmed him and warmed his heart. Dissecting a spell and creating a formation that represented it from scratch was considered impossible, but he had done it. If only the predecessors who came up with the slaughter, defense, and enhanced formations could see him. Whoever conceived of connecting nodes of iron to amplify and manipulate had started the wondrous world of formations, and Orin desired to be the one who carried it to its proper glory. Perhaps, one day, formation masters would wield formations in a battle, slaughtering their enemies while protecting their allies. A single flick of a wrist would create an intricate formation that needed no use of a vein or a mountainous chunk of crystalline. "What do you want to do? What do you want?" His lord's voice echoed, asking the unanswered question from years ago. "I want to serve you and bring you victories. I want to be the greatest formation master and change it." Orin drew one last circle and laughed, tearing up at the completed matrix of nodes and lines written in his blood. He leaped to the center and recalled the champions, their last reserves of iron kept for this single moment. Uriah faced the north, Mekhl turned to the south, Gavuel looked east, and Rahel stared to the west. Raising a hand, Orin slammed his palm on the central node. Activate! Act 4. Fallen Heaven, Chapter 736. The Light of Hope. The node shone, the lines shimmering to and from every place. Orin took out 3 bottles and poured out their contents in the center. One contained the collected blood of everyone in their encampment, the loyal soldiers and followers of his lord. The second dripped a single drop, the blood he collected from Lysander. The last bottle, given to him by one of the brilliant Drake Empire, released the blood of the princess and her retinue. The blood of all coalesced into an orb that floated above the central node. Light pierced it and separated it into all the individual drops, one for each person, shining like the red stars above. The world, no, the dark tower below, shuddered. Iron streamed forth in rapid tides, coursing to the discs and climbing up to reach his formation. Engulfed by the swell of iron and a flood of light, Orin looked at his hands and watched the gashes and cuts close up, with a healthy color returning to his skin. The warmest of lights touched his cheeks and embraced him as if it were a mother holding her child. Exhaustion left him, and renewal began. His core spun in joy and was filled to the brim with iron. He rose and raised his hands, pumping his fists up on the highest point in all of Talos, staring upward at the vast bed of stars. "I did it!" Orin shouted, proclaiming to everyone and anyone who could listen. "I am the greatest formation master in all of history." His laughter rang out. The light pulsed and spread out as a great tide of starry mists, rippling down and coursing to everyone who had given their blood. Orin grinned and thumped his chest, wishing the others could see the moment of triumph. Marcus caught Sel's spear in his claw and gritted his teeth, enduring the shockwave of terrifying iron that imploded in his grip. Cracks covered every inch of his black scales, splitting the red, fiery patterns of Eve's flames. Swinging wide, he extended his other claw and caught Sel's shoulder, burning off parts of the cloak to reveal fine, glossy skin of metallic sheen. Smoke sizzled upon contact, the immense heat in his palm attempting to melt Sel's iron body. Marcus's throat fumed smog and began to emit a red glare, readying a true dragon's breath. Sel tried to jab his spear forward, but Marcus held it tight, refusing to let go further, pointing it away from harm. Cuts and fresh scars riddled his scaly form. Molten blood popped and forced itself out of them, unable to withstand the rising pressure, and smoldered as it seeped everywhere. The last reserves of his Ein had been for this moment, and to squander it for naught would be an insult to himself. A dragon roared in Marcus's heart and tremored the air around them, bearing down on Cell, who shuddered and buckled his knees. At the moment the dragon's flame departed from his mouth, the sharp cry of screeching metal banged in quick succession. The ground caved in several inches. A platinum foot, bearing a spearhead at its toes, snapped forward, glinting red-hot as it opposed the dragon breath. That damned integration made Cell's attacks far more formidable, almost in the same manner as his lord's Reese. Marcus couldn't hold on and was flung away to the nearby wall, crashing on and deepening a hole in it. Panting, he fixated his draconic gaze on Cell, noting the ancestral mark blinking and flashing before the shining crown shattered apart. Moreover, one of Cell's legs had been burned to a crisp, forcing the divine enforcer to limp on his one good leg. Not bad. It is almost displeasing to kill one so skilled. I wish we could have fought under different circumstances, but you are now spent, and I must kill you. Cell raised his spear, pointing it at Marcus. Blood dripped down his fingers and slicked down the shaft to the tip. Marcus groaned and tore himself free from the wall, leaving behind a few black scales on the stone. His Ein was spent, and his body no longer listened to his will. All he could do was stand and wait for Cell's move. Suddenly, the dark tower shuddered, and both turned their gazes up. Marcus smiled as he sensed a small, unique Ein mixed in the ocean weighing on his head. It was Orin's. The damned rascal finally succeeded. A mist of light and Ein flooded the broken room and entered Marcus. "Thank you, Orin." He gladly received the gift and emitted a strong light that layered over his form, patching together the cracked and missing scales and replenishing his depleted Ein. Cell looked surprised, or rather, Marcus felt he was underneath that mask. He raised his claws and smiled fiercely, baring his rows of sharp teeth. "Now, it's a fair fight, O divine enforcer. You and your lord. You are full of surprises. I can never underestimate anyone related to him. Thank you for the lesson." Cell removed his cloak, wearing a sleeveless armor that clung tightly to his skin. His spear glinted dangerously, reflecting the light Marcus had received. "Not bad at all." Marcus flapped his wings and dashed towards Cell, intent on slaying the divine enforcer. Orin's aid had come at the best time for him to enjoy this battle to the fullest against Cell. "Crag!" Restel screamed in his ears from the shadows, her trembling voice grating on his nerves. Anger flared and filled his vision red. Why did she sound so worried, sad, and afraid? He awoke and gasped, realizing he was staring at the floor, half of his face drowned in his own blood. Restel screamed again in his ears, and he roared, smashing his claws on the ground to force himself up. With that, his head cleared. He remembered what had happened as he studied the streams of blood gushing from his mangled flesh, chunks of skin and muscle missing as if torn or bitten off. A loud stomp diverted his attention toward it, the sweeper's roar blaring out with bits of flesh dangling between its sharp teeth. Experiment 23, you continue to outperform my calculations. Perhaps the index might fully grasp your new ceiling, but it is astonishing nonetheless. Maybe we have been mistaken in our approach. Evolution comes from necessity and will for survival, neither of which we had instilled in you and the other failures. Incredible what a firm-rooted determination and loyalty can do. Faust smirked, still bleeding from the eye Restel had stabbed. He glared at the shadow with a hateful gaze. "It's a pity she can't do anything for you anymore. What use is a shadow if the body can no longer move?" "Shut up! Come closer!" Crag roared, clenching every fiber of his being to stop the bleeding. "My teeth are as sharp as ever. We both die, or I win." The sweeper was bleeding from several spots where he had taken bites out of him. Claw marks and charred skin that crackled with sparks of lightning could be seen on every naked skin of the monster, deep wounds that revealed the white bone inside. His victory was so close, very close. The lion in him accompanied him in a resounding roar. It, too, felt the victory nearby and growled, deciding to strike at the creature at the risk of its own life. unwilling to put down its pride and honor. Crag laughed heartily and staggered forward, smiling fiercely. He couldn't disappoint the beast in him, for they were one and the same. Out of nowhere, a dense light flooded the grand hall, covering the ceiling of gems and art, brushing past the statues without care. Crag looked up, as did Faust. Orin made it! Orin made it! Riestel's cheer and sobs of joy made Crag sigh in relief at his sister's brightening mood. In a way, he now owed the damn brat. The light surged in great rivers and concentrated on him, the flesh regrowing and resown in new veins, muscles, and skin. The few wisps of lightning clinging to his fur trembled and burst, now coating his regrown fur in an immense amount. What is this? How absurd! How could such an occurrence happen? No spell should have such an effect. Faust stammered, then went mute, seemingly shaken by Crag's revival. I don't know how, but I know now. I can kill you, Faust. Crag charged and streaked across in a trail of lightning, swiping his claw. The sweeper retreated, but he had taken its arm and raised it, wagging it as a taunt toward Faust, who finally showed hints of fear in that paling face. Thank you, Faust. Thanks to you, I met Lordy and the others. Riestel and I are safe. And you are dead. You damned defective. Faust couldn't finish the rest of his insulting words. Crag zapped and pulled out Faust's head, separating the foul scientist from his prized experiment and crushing the frightened man under his foot. Blood and brain matter splattered on the ground, mushed under his soles. It was his victory. Crag released a victorious roar and thumped his chest while staring up. Nicely done, you weak brat. Act 4. Fallen Heaven, Chapter 737. The endless war continues. After so long, the moment finally arrived. Oscar had been worried the entire time, while sitting in the farthest place from where the fighting reached its climax. His solace lay in the fact that Lilith was dead, consoling his disturbed mind that it was enough. He had done all he could. Now, everyone's efforts bore fruit, lending the time and aid for Orin to complete his formation. It was a risky plan with a horrid array of unknowns and variables beyond his control, but luckily, it worked. He had no clue as to the statuses of all of his people. All he knew was they certainly followed his instructions, their loyalty allowing no less. Between the crevices and cracks laden in the ceiling, bright eyes shimmered and filled the gaps, like veins pumping pure light instead of blood. A downpour of light and iron in the form of mist spilled forth like a river rushing out of a broken dam. Oscar stood and received the gift of light, grunting as the immense iron dug into every pore and infused itself into him. Visibly, his wounds healed, the cauterized scabs peeling off for new skin to reveal itself, and the long, fresh scars fading away. He shivered and spat out a mouthful of black blood that had been stuck in his internal organs. Finally, their victory was at hand. Well done! Your allies have all healed and are at full strength. A brand new day dawns on them. Some have unfortunately perished beforehand, but the advantage is now yours. Maturs laughed. The convergence is approaching. Ready yourself, Oscar. Your time will soon be here. Will I still need to accept your offer if the Carolummen don't descend? Oscar asked, probing for more information. He couldn't shake off the feeling that Maturs knew more about what was happening or would happen. After all, the Ancient of Metal's words always carried a heavy certainty to them, as if no other arguments or paths could diverge their intent. They will descend, Maturs sounded certain. That is certain. Nothing can change this outcome, not even your best efforts. The will of the traitors, their determination forged and sharpened for countless years since their loss and retreat, shall not be broken here. You've seen it in the man named Gilbert, the unshakable belief in his foul bloodline. Can you not act? Kill him here and end it now. Oscar already knew the answer. No. During the years of fallen heaven's opening, the throne, my prison, tightens its hold on me. I can do very little, even in this room. I place my hopes in you. Maturs fiddled with one of his fingers and pulled it off, showing the rust rotting it from the inside. I used too much of my power in recent years for you, for others. My death is close. His glowing red eyes shifted to stare past Oscar, and he sighed heavily, sounding like the groaning of metal. Indeed, the mistakes of our past will persist to the present. Oscar followed Maturs's line of sight and frowned at the woman marching in with a wide grin. Her blonde hair draped and flowed like a golden tapestry, silky and glossy, shining brightly underneath the shimmering ceiling. While he wondered how Circe had managed to make it down here, he didn't speak nor consider listening to her vile words, raising his arm with fierce iron blazing in pseudo-guise. Right now, he didn't have any other intent other than to kill her and end the sad chapter of Volton's life, having felt the warrior's deep regret for his descendants. Geez, can't you welcome me with anything else? Circe winked one of her violet eyes, but focused on Maturs behind him, bowing in reverence with her head touching the ground. I greet the Ancient of Metal, Lord Maturs. I, the descendant of Volton's blood, have arrived. May the Ancients bless this union between us and show favor to the savior that will be. I've heard enough. Kill her, Erden growled. Stay your hands. The Voltens is our responsibility. Maturs halted them, his words carrying a weight that constricted their limbs and forced the Ein back inside their cores. Tell me, young daughter of Volten, why do you persist in this path, even though my brother in fire told you the truth? Lord Maturs, our bloodline has lived on, enduring the curse of Reese, living in remote areas for peace. The burden of countless Voltens, their wishes carried over for countless years, lives on in me. Please do not deny us this. If so, then what has it all been for? You've watched us from above and have seen our suffering, heard our cries. Please, we must have the Volten savior. Circe raised her head and pleaded with tears streaking down her cheeks, desperation creasing her fair brow in deep wrinkles. She gained no sympathy from Oscar as he stared her down, waiting to strike and kill her. But he had to admire her wholehearted devotion, as crazed her desires and actions were. But death should be her fate here, lest the Ancient of Metal stop him. You Volten, the abominable acts we've committed, yes, they were all necessary for Talos, but no longer. Your plight is meaningless to the survival of our beloved Talos. A new future has been forged. The old ways are dead. The indifference and apathetic cruelty in Matur's answer even made Oscar wince. The Ancient of Metal wasn't going to interfere in his plans to kill her, good, but he couldn't help but pity Circe, who suffered unnerving jolts and shakes as if her brain had been damaged. Her violet gaze widened and fixated on Maturs, her mouth mumbling nonsense. No, how can you abandon us? Everything we did for Talos, for the wishes of our ancestors and the Ancients. Circe screamed. A loud snap quaked the earth, and Circe vanished. Any echo of her words cut short and ended as if she had never been here, her existence wiped off from this place. It was so sudden that Oscar stared, unable to comprehend what had just happened. One moment, she was there, but now she wasn't. He turned to the source of the snap and saw a finger and a thumb split off Matur's hand, the rusted metal clattering with dull sounds and crumbling apart in a sands of rust soon after. It is done. Hopefully, the past will never surface again, and we will never need a Volten savior. That is what the man would have wanted. It's a pity. If they had produced one earlier, I would have rejoiced, but now I think the future where we need one may not be one where Talos survives. May we never need the steel of their blades. Maturs rested back on his throne, wheezing out puffs of rust, and Oscar pitied the Ancient of Metal. Maturs looked up. Indeed, the Caroliman boy is relentless and will not back down. Prepare yourself, Oscar. They are coming, and he will ensure it at the much cost, enough to tip the scales in our favor. Orin rejoiced and let out a triumphant shout, still basking the light of his formation. For many sleepless nights that lasted for 6 months, he unraveled and created the complex formation to mimic the Grade 4 light element spell, Archgrace, the best healing spell that burned out poison and recovered flesh. Layered on that was another formation that linked the outgoing spell to the blood provided, thereby reaching everyone. Hundreds of thousands of his marks riddled the walls of the Dark Tower, written in blood and pain, all worth it for his lord's victory. Thank you. He bowed to each of the champions. They had expended the Ein in their cores and became functionally dead. Orin collected them and stood on the highest disc, overlooking the fruit of his hard labor. The beasts of the lands of Zereth overwhelmed their fouler counterparts. Phoenixes skewered dragons on their beaks, crows dug talons in the injured scales of their serpentine foes, and stampedes of a myriad of others trampled over the rest. On the other side, Fennu led the hundreds of their army in a brave charge, overwhelming the weakened foes, boisterous shouts of preeminent victory rising with each one slain. Nearby, the other divine enforcers, lacking the spearman's cell, withdrew but could not shake off the pursuit of the strongest forces of Shatrama, the Argent Scions, the highest above all other than the Shattered Scion. A piercing scream forced Orin to shut his ears, and he found the source below, witnessing Celestina's rapier piercing Arlena's shoulder, the devilish face of the holy daughter twisting in pain and broken pride. Good. Orin sighed in relief at the victory surrounding him. Ren, Gloria! He heard his ladies cry, his lord's beloved rushing up and embracing Ren and Gloria. Orin frowned and scrutinized the area, frowning. His lord had not appeared yet. Did the journey below take too long? What happened to his lord? Catching himself in a dangerous line of thought, Orin tossed aside his worries and trusted his lord's decisions, berating himself for being a fool like Crag always chided him for. His attention drew toward the battle between Lysander and Gilbert and relaxed as Lysander pushed the blue-haired prick back. "Give it up. You lost." Lysander smacked down with a large diamond palm that could crush a fort. Gilbert raised his broadsword and cut it in half, suddenly feeling weaker. A heavy diamond punch rammed into his ribs, forcing the air from his lungs. Gilbert gasped and retreated, noticing his ancestral mark had been broken, the pieces scattering to the wind. Lysander shook the lightning off his knuckles and sighed. "How interesting. We've both been placed second fiddle to that man. Even I have become a simple tool in his hand. Great, great. I can't get enough of this. Shut up, shut up, shut up." Gilbert screamed in his mind while holding back the blood rising from his chest. He refused to show a hint of weakness. An explosion of electricity expanded, swirling around Lysander and locking him in a prison of lightning. However, a casual swing reduced his spell to mere fizzling sparks. At that moment, Gilbert realized he couldn't win. The mere thought was humiliating and angered him, but he had no way to deny it. The gap between them had reversed and widened. "Don't stare at me like that. Don't you dare stare at me like that." Panting, Gilbert gritted his teeth and clenched his broadsword so tightly his palms bled. Too long, for all of his childhood, he had endured those same stares from others. Some showed joy in bullying him and anger at his constant need for aid. But the types that pierced his soul deeper than any other were the indifferent gazes that disregarded him as if he wasn't alive, mere dust in their path. How dare they? He was a grade 9 of the noblest blood in all of existence. "I can't lose. I can't lose. I will ascend and take my place." Gilbert knew what had to be done and escaped, dodging Lysander's ceaseless pursuit. He headed for the Titan, the gift of his ancestors. His words found strength and erupted in a great cry. "Titan, get me to the center. Use your power. Kill them." Noted drops in iron levels will affect the output of the formation. The Titan responded. "Just do it," Gilbert shouted. "Affirmative, successor." The Titan raised its arms as Gilbert laughed, mocking Lysander, who retreated. Everyone scurried away like rats, mere ants before the Titan's feet. Looking down from atop the Titan's head, he was sure this view was meant for him, no other. Rays of powerful iron bombarded the path forward and fired at anyone who tried to draw near. The Titan stomped ahead and reached the discs. The damned intruders had already escaped, leaving the discs empty. He wished he had the chance to kill the damnable formation user who destroyed all of their plans with a single formation. But that time would be later, especially with his kin. Gilbert leaped up and reached the center of the highest disc, kneeling. He glanced up and stared at the starry sky, trying to peer past it to the home of the Cariolumans, his people. "I will go home." Gilbert slammed his hands on the floor. The Titan stood underneath as the other discs spread and rotated around its massive frame. The last crackles of iron burned out of its eyes, a rusted husk remaining in place as the iron linked the discs in a special configuration stored within the Titan. It had been for this moment. Gilbert screamed out as the iron poured from the dark tower, and pierce the sky. Let the way be opened. Chapter 738. The Descent of the Carolwoman. Avril felt the world shaking and heard a mournful wail, a desperate cry of pain and sadness shouting in the fierce winds. She didn't know why, but it disturbed her and filled her heart with grief. The feeling of triumph and confidence earlier almost seemed to be a lie compared to how her heart ached now. Around her, her sister, children, everyone shed a few unwilling tears, some wiping their eyes while looking confused. Several curious Exalts attempted to attack Gilbert in the center in a rapid bombardment, their powerful spells and integrations failing to pierce a dense barrier that formed around the array of discs. The shattered Scion, who became their ally for some reason, struck hard to no avail, the diamond cracking off and revealing his bare fist. Even a grade 9 failed to break through. Avril decided it wasn't worth remaining so close and wrapped vines around Ren and Gloria, pulling them along to escape whatever was about to happen. She tried to exit down one of the hatches, but a layer of iron formed in the open gaps, acting as new flooring. The exits were closed, so her only option was to stand by the edge. Others came to a similar idea, and soon enough, everyone crowded at the edges. The violent streams of iron endlessly erupting around them prevented anyone from jumping off and climbing down. Avril tested it by tapping it with the bottom of her staff and frowned at the spray of sparks. Ren, Gloria, Orin, get behind me. She won't let anything happen to her children. Avril nudged them back. Ren enjoyed a heartfelt reunion with Renee, whom she had picked up while climbing the tower. It was a stroke of luck to have found her future daughter-in-law on the way, but she feared she had led her into a death trap with no way out. Gilbert's followers huddled near the barrier protecting Gilbert, the Titan, and the discs. They chanted his name and cheered for their coming victory, just as she and the others had done a few minutes ago. The situation had reversed, or as Oscar would say, it's been flipped. Is that you, Avril? A familiar voice called out for her, and she recognized the pair of emerald eyes and silver hair instantly. Celestina? It's been a while. She wished you could have visited Convicius City at least once. Avril formed a smile and hugged her friend. Though Celestina was her husband's former crush, she didn't mind being good friends since she could tell the princess deeply cared for Oscar. Celestina stiffened with a startled look and returned the smile, patting her on the back. Sorry, too many people follow my movements since I'm the current empress, and I couldn't trust that I was safe enough to visit you or him. Our blunder decades ago cost him everything, and we couldn't bear to make the same mistake twice. Celestina gave a weak smile and rubbed her temples in clear distress. Being under that bastard's thrall didn't help me to move freely either. She glanced behind her and grinned. Are they Ren and Gloria? They've grown up well. Good evening, princess. I would have preferred the manner of our meeting to be on brighter occasions, but a great pity it is that we should meet again in these dire circumstances. Gloria curtsied and lowered her head. Avril blinked and covered her gaping mouth, wondering where her daughter disappeared off to. The miscreant and mischievous Gloria somehow became so well-behaved and proper. Beside her, Ren also bowed silently. Did Maya teach them? Or Master Remulus? I haven't seen you two for nearly a century. What a pair of splendid exalts you've become. Celestina tucked her silver hair behind her ear. She gazed around and asked, Where is Oscar? You know him. He's trying to save everyone in his own way. She can't help but worry for him, but knows he can do it. Avril looked down, wishing she had the eyes to peer past the floors and see her beloved, presumably in the deep pit he mentioned long ago. Knowing him, he was up to something. Her role was to stay alive until he arrived. Glancing up, she noticed Charles, Celestina's brother, and Gavin, the royal guard. Where's Serena? Lady Tur, my wife and I talked at length and decided she'd wait below and hide with the others. Most of us have families to look after. Gavin chuckled underneath his golden helmet. We're not as daring as the Turs, but we can't waste our time catching up. There must be something we can do. He pointed at Gilbert, standing in the center. There is none, Orin spoke up. Every bit of the Dark Tower's configuration is fixating on the singular point up there. Breaking through it would require Ein and power beyond probably even King Exalt's. What is used for? Gloria asked. Her questions didn't need an answer from Orin, as one arrived soon after. The mournful cries halted as the wind stilled the stagnant air. Far above, A long crack split a small section of the sky and opened like an eye, shining a bright light that showered down on the discs. Faint shadows shifted and moved behind the light, drawing closer, the shuddering of the world intensifying every second. A person descended and landed on Gilbert's disc, followed by several others, each arrival bursting with otherworldly eyne that filled her with dread. 9 had gathered, 9 of the most handsome and beautiful people she had ever seen in her life, save Oscar. Their azure gazes matched their blue hair, their faces distinct as if carefully crafted to perfection. Standing above the others and garbed in fine clothes of the highest material, they shone and bathed in divine light, as if flaunting their greatness to the rest. She heard a loud clank and turned to see someone had dropped his weapon, and a few others dropped theirs in surrender. She couldn't blame them, as the daunting eyne imposed on her. 4 of them were grade 9, and the rest were grade 8, and all of them shone an ancestral mark on their foreheads. With Gilbert, that made it 5 grade 9 exalts. The fear jolted up her spine, pinching her nerves in sharp panic that made her want to scream and clutch her head in despair. Only death seemed certain now. Dropping to her knees, Avril shivered, feeling the warmth leave her blood as if it had given up and prepared to become a corpse. Having endured the tortures of Lilith and received the soothing consolation of Oscar, her mind didn't fall into despair and kept to its wits. But screams and panic spread in the crowd, many banging on the walls of shimmering eyne, failing even to create a ripple. The offspring of Lady Cassandra. We have been waiting for your call. I am Artera. The man who introduced himself cleaned his glasses with a blue handkerchief and put them back on. He was garbed in a black suit and cloak, carrying a pocket watch in his hand. His short blue hair covered his forehead with bangs and barely reached the back of his neck. Cassandra, my mother. Can I see her? Gilbert asked in a surprisingly tame tone, counter to the arrogance he shouted with before. See her? Why should we allow a screw-up like him into our sanctum? Another Carolwoman scoffed, jabbing a finger in Gilbert's direction. The plan was for 15 of us to get through, yet only 9 breached past the world's restrictions. The power should have been enough for it. Calm down, Alvarez. He is of Carolwoman blood. Artera waved Alvarez away. The Titan expended far more power than expected and lost control of the tower's formation. Not only that, Artera tapped his foot over the floor of the disc. Someone placed their own formation that expanded over our configuration and weakened the output of ours. I didn't expect such skill in this lower world. Orin's formation did more than just heal her and the others. Avril thanked Orin silently, and the young Exalt flashed a prideful smile back, thumping his chest. She shuddered at the possibility of facing 15 of these monsters. 9 was still daunting, but perhaps bearable. Thankfully, Gilbert didn't point them out, strangely docile. So many have survived. Who is on your side? I shall have to note them down for later. Artera swept a chilling gaze at the crowd, a simple passing glance buckling her knees. Oscar, where are you doing? I want to see you. Avril pleaded in her heart. She felt death approaching. So they've come. Far fewer than I had expected. Thanks to the formation your follower crafted to siphon the Dark Tower's Eyne, and thanks to the efforts of the others to draw out the Titan's reserve Eyne. Matur said, glancing down, they cannot act now, lest they suffer the backlash of Talos' fury. But their chance will come in the convergence when they bask in the stolen Eyne of our world. After that, they won't need to worry and massacre everyone. Is my wife all right? Oscar worried for Avril. For now, Matur's answered. The red eyes brightened and peered below. The convergence is starting. The time is here. Matur's hand stretched out, and Oscar floated in the air, not of his volition, and remained still, waiting for it to begin. Erden joined him by the side. Globs of Eyne began to bubble up from the ground, falling upward. More and more surfaced and flooded the entire chamber, drowning everyone in the pure Eyne. Matur's clenched his hand and forced nearly all of it into Oscar and Erden. The ocean refilled and swept past the gate, presumably rushing up the pit toward the Dark Tower. Oscar couldn't breathe and strained his thoughts, trying to stay conscious, but the pain was beyond any he had felt. The pools of ascension paled in comparison. The hand of Saul in his chest was a mere bite compared to the crushing Eyne that broke his bones. It filled his lungs, forced the blood out of his veins through his orifices, and peeled his skin. His muffled screams found a sole companion in Erden's cries. Demon offered to switch, but he rejected him. He knew pain well, and he could endure it, or else it would be for naught. It would be a power given to one who couldn't bear it. No, this was his fight. Good? That is good. Fight, Oscar. Fight, Erden. Be the metal of the earth. Be the fires that roar in volcanoes. Our hopes rest in you. Act 4. Fallen Heaven. Chapter 739. The Convergence. Oscar struggled to stay awake and tried to scream, but he drowned in the pure eyne of the convergence. He sought solace in the deep recesses of his mind and found none. Retreating in his inner thoughts only replayed his biggest mistakes, the tragedies of the deaths and losses in his past. Rather than peace, it flared up his anger that swelled and rushed in his veins, and at that moment something in him snapped. Oscar willed himself wide awake, letting out a muted roar. He refused to relent and give in. The pain was nothing compared to what he had suffered all those years ago, and what he could suffer later if he didn't earn this power. His core thumped like a heart and spun as it collapsed within itself, gathering into a fine point and merging with his elemental spark of metal. The procession into King Exalt started, light and eyne pouring out of his orifices. He had assumed the only way to become a King Exalt was to use an imperial jewel like the one he found in the Frozen Realm and gifted to his master, Draven, during the war. But once he learned about Fallen Heaven, he realized its true importance. Rather than the treasures that could be found and the chance to slaughter and loot many others from all over Talos, the true value of Fallen Heaven was the convergence. The convergence brought forth a wellspring of incredibly potent eyne that flooded the Dark Tower and possessed the same potential as an imperial jewel. Any greater martial exalt still alive would absorb a glob of that eyne and undergo the advancement into King Exalt. The greatest part was the certainty of success. The convergence allowed anyone down to the lowest grade Xianxia to become King Exalts. Thus, it was recorded that the era after Fallen Heaven and the great scouring of Talos be known as the Age of Kings, the dawning of a new generation of the highest number of King Exalts. Though the chances of success should be guaranteed, Oscar knew that wouldn't be true in his case. Everyone else needed only one concentrated lump of the convergence eyne, but matures had gathered dozens, perhaps hundreds of them, into this pool around him, all for the sake of elevating him not just to a King Exalt, but to integrate the power of an ancient in his fleshy, human form. Matures mentioned it was highly possible he might die during the process, and it showed in the pain that suffocated his organs to the point of turning into mush. Oscar squirmed and writhed, unable to open his eyes. However, his ears worked well, hearing the ancients conversing outside. The Dark Tower steals the vital eyne directly from Talos' core and pours it in here. The convergence is the agonizing torture of our world, Matur said almost in a grim tone, almost mournful and human. What purpose do those Cretans have for that? The world benefits from the influx of King Exalts that help to keep our people's fire burning. They also want Talos, so why? Drawing our beloved world toward death faster is foolish, Ignires asked. The Karalumen have finally succeeded in intruding here. However, they cannot act yet. One move of their befouled eyne will trigger Talos' response. Maturs coughed and gasped in slow wheezes like metal scraping. With the eyne of the convergence of Talos' life itself for their advancement, they will be able to carry on and fight in our world, free of consequences and repercussions. And the great scouring below will leave a weakened world, ready for them to conquer. Puppets of the Karalumen, enticed by Lockwood, are already below, waiting for their true masters. All of this I have watched and have been unable to interfere. And where are the others? Okeens? Tectones? Illumins? Shadrez? Zers? Thunders? Ignires' voice crackled. Maturs became silent and then sighed. The first few openings were tolerable. But each time after, when the convergence robbed Talos of life and eyne, in every aftermath, one of us gave their life to provide for our dying world. Shadrez of darkness died. Illumins of light became the second, and then thunders of lightning. Now, the convergence is too powerful. Zers and Okeens will give their lives and ensure Talos can survive long enough. Oscar couldn't believe what he was hearing and felt sad, his tears unable to spill out of the blaring eye that poured from his eyes. The sacrifices and hidden battles of the ancients had saved them, protected them, and prolonged their existence for countless years. He could only live his life thanks to them. What sort of torment did Matur's experience as his fellow ancients died one by one while he sat here, unable to help? Hearing the truth, he gnashed his teeth and swore in his heart that he wouldn't allow their sacrifices to be wasted. While they made mistakes, such as in Volton's case, they suffered the same as others. He clamped his mouth tightly and endured in silence, letting the burning convergence settle in. Yes, that is the way, Oscar. Now, be prepared. Receive the essence of an ancient. Be metal. Matur spoke clearly. Oscar grunted as a sharp pain struck his chest, as if a spear had pierced him directly in the heart. Another two impaled his lungs. It carried on until every organ in his body had been struck except his brain. Then, what felt like needles pierced every inch of his bones. Oscar reeled and screamed in the burning agony spreading throughout his body from a foreign substance, something seeping in and burying itself in every fiber of his body and embedding itself in his marrow. He couldn't even scream or breathe, feeling death approaching. A final spike pierced his head, straight in his brain, and he lost all semblance of thought, having only one. Hold on, Avril. I'll live. I'll survive and come straight to you. Oscar promised as the floating pool of convergence grew smaller, all of it condensing inside him. Orin understood now why the matrix of the Dark Tower had been set up in such a complicated configuration. His masterful eyes watched the intricate nodes shifting and turning, drawing in an incredible amount of out of what rested below, which he could only guess to be Talos itself, for no other source could provide it. Below his feet, globs of the purest and most unique he had ever laid eyes on seeped past the floor and floated up, reminding him of the bubbles children often played with. One by one, the greater martial exalts, including his lady and others, absorbed the and were engulfed in bright pillars that rose to the sky. We can't stop the others from advancing. Darn it, he considered the idea of interfering with the enemy's advancements, but saw others try it out and failed to break through the pillars of that acted like barriers, securing a safe transition. Above on the discs, the newcomers, the Karalumen, sat and invoked their advancement. His prided mind, capable of calculating all the possibilities, failed to come up with an answer to the question of victory. The one shot they had was to kill Gilbert before it all started, but they failed in that due to the Titan's interference. Lysander had no chance against all of the Karalumen together, especially once they all became King Exalts. We'll have to kill off any of their supporters during this time. The less we have to fight, the more they can focus on the Karalumen. He came up with a plan, but lacked the people to act on it. For better or for worse, their side held the vast majority of greater martial exalts. A hatch flung open, blown off the hinges and clanged on the floor. Orin turned toward it and saw Marcus stepping out with Eve in his arms, wrapped in fresh bandages. It seemed the barrier that prevented them from running down still allowed people to climb up. Crag came up next carrying Resdell. Astrid swept up and landed on a patch of ice. Everyone. At first he was glad, but Orin turned to shock and realized something was very off. The convergence should have affected all greater martial exalts. Everyone was forced to undergo the advancement, willing or not. Yet his brothers and sisters were not caught in the pillars of and even made it up here during the convergence. Wait. He scratched his head, unbelieving the possibility just calculated in his mind. The harrowing possible truth. Your guess should be the truth. Marcus grinned and patted Orin's head before greeting the others. I am glad to see the two of you safe, young master and young lady. Hold on. Orin gripped Marcus's wrist and glanced at the others. You're all, don't me that's the truth. Please, he pleaded because he refused to believe, but the evidence of their presence here crushed him. We're failures, little brat, Crag said with a low grunt. Failures for a reason despite our strength. It's all right, Orin. Eve rubbed and pinched his cheek, giving a gentle smile. We were prepared for it since the start. We never told you because you deserve better. Sorry. Restel hid her face behind her long, shaggy hair, sounding ashamed. Now you see why I was so desperate. Astrid scoffed. It's inevitable and cursed. That is our fate. We can never be King Exalts. Our powers end here. The convergence appears to understand that. But there's a silver lining here. We're the only ones with the strength of greater martial exalts still able to fight right now. Marcus clenched his hands, now turned into black, scaly claws. Safeguard the others, Orin. We shall cleanse this place of our Lord's enemies and pave the path for his arrival. Orin couldn't speak and only watched as his brothers and sisters of different experiments rushed in and slaughtered the other martial exalts, leading some of their forces in a great massacre, overwhelming all others. Seeing this, he shed many tears and muttered, "You liars." Act 4. Fallen Heaven. Chapter 740. 3 for 2. Death for Life. Oscar's Rebirth. The first hour of the procession was a mere scrap on the skin compared to what came next. Oscar had thought the worst was behind him, but as usual, his expectations were rarely met and cast into deep disappointment. The stakes and needles impaling him began to burn, searing unending agony in his very flesh as if he was melting. His struggles never surfaced, unable to lift a finger nor twitch a brow, his body no longer his to control. Being a fabricator, he understood now that he was like an ore, an unrefined material undergoing the fires of the furnace and purified into what matures needed him to become. The unimaginable pain blacked him out of consciousness but then brought him right back, never letting him go. It doubled from the fact he could share his senses with Erden, who underwent a similar procession in Ignire's flames. Rather than dispersing and sharing the pain to lighten the burden, their connection, which helped him throughout many battles, acted against them and amplified the pain. Their agony merged and stoked each other into greater suffering. Somehow he lost the ability to scream, or rather, the attempt to scream. "Where am I?" Oscar saw a strange world. Mist blocked his view, allowing him to see a mere foot forward, and he looked down to see he had regained his hands, feet, and speech, shouting once. Perhaps the ground was of mist as well, since Oscar saw no dirt or stone under his feet. A gray world lacking vibrant colors, shrouded in endless mist that never ceased no matter where he went. But there was a light, a source from somewhere that allowed him to see, and it came from behind this veil. Yet after hours of walking, the distance hadn't closed. "Oh, am I dead?" Oscar stopped and wanted to turn his head to look back, but the mists extended and grasped him, forcing his eyes forward. Faint whispers of the ones lurking beyond beckoned him, and he unwillingly carried on, treading the pathway down. In his heart, he knew now that this place had to be the in-between, the road between the living and the dead, where thought and memory died and led to what may be next. His struggle had changed, and he tried to resist death's call. Yet like Maturz's procession, he lacked control over himself. Step by step, he drew closer to his death. "This isn't working. You rusted lump of metal." Ignire's fumed and raised flames. He could sense the flames of Oscar and Erden dwindling to a faint ember, barely holding on. Forcing one to inherit the will and power of an ancient was hard enough, but bringing a person back from the dead was impossible. Ignire's wanted to let up but clenched his fiery hands tighter, knowing a moment of reluctance and hesitation would unravel their efforts. Everything had led to this moment. The boy's suffering, the tragedies of his past, the sacrifices of his fellow ancients, and their own lives were all meant for this. "Do something," he shouted. "It's so close, very close, but the two are unable to fuse with our essence." "Was I wrong?" Matur sighed, cracks splitting from his visor. "We are lacking. We are finished. The Carolmen have won. I had hoped, planned, and gambled, and I have lost. Forgive me. I have failed you all. No, there must be something. I have been beside this boy for many years. His path cannot end here." Ignire's refused to believe it. Ever since he met the boy in the fiery caverns under the far sky continent, he had known a grander destiny awaited Oscar. He had witnessed Esther's death at the hands of the Carolmen and lay dormant for countless years alone before meeting the boy. He lowered his head and felt despair, his own flames waning and losing its brightness. They lost. Even at the cost of our lives and essence, we can't start the fire. Perhaps this was meant to be. Since the moment Esther strayed from Talos' design, we lost. Fools. Despair. Not alone. You pair of fools. The long years have wasted your brilliant minds and thrown you into despair. Remember that we are not alone. We are all here together. A deep voice, rumbling like an earthquake, echoed deep in the chamber and shocked Ignires. Oscar's body pulsated with a familiar whine, and it took the form of his old friend, Tectones, the Ancient of Earth. His gigantic stone figure, condensed of mountains and cliffs, emerged. Tectones, where did you come from? When did you place a part of yourself in Oscar? Maturs asked, also clearly shocked. You kept yourself hidden even from Maturs? You damn joker. One last prank before we go. Ignires cackled and flared up a brand new set of flames. He had forgotten it so long ago when the alter ego met Tectones in the Hollow Mountain. Watch, ponder, decide. I remained hidden to watch and see the passing of time and the decisions of others. I pondered as Maturs explained his plan and decided it was my time. Tectones reached out his hands and encased Oscar and Erden in his stone grip, covering them completely. Tectones, what can you do for them? Maturs asked. Metal, flames, earth, the last step for them to awaken. That is me. In the deep earth, metals rest, waiting to be found. In the earth, flames smolder and flow before erupting to freedom. They cannot be without. In the earth formed and bound. Thus, I shall do the same. In the earth, their powers will be complete. Tectones rambled on, as usual, the most talkative of the ancients. Ein rippled from his stone hands, beating like the thumping of a heart. That was it, the final step, the part they lacked. The flames of their life blinked and flickered, growing brighter and stronger. It's here. Ignires poured in all of his flames. His volcanic shoulders collapsed, his fingers cracked like brittle clay, and his body slowly flaked off, the embers phasing through the barrier of stone and entering Erden. To the side, Maturs did something similar, tearing apart his own body into sands of pure metal and entering Oscar. Tectones grunted as his wide stone hands trembled, keeping the rampant powers of two ancients locked inside his palms and binding them to the two inside. Cracks spread over his friend's form, irreversible damage to Tectones' spirit, and Ignires knew today that three ancients would die, sacrificing themselves for the sake of the future. Ignires focused on Erden and then turned to Oscar. Come back to us, boy. I only wish I could have seen how great you would have soared, how amazing your flames would have burned and shone on Talos. Thank you for letting this failed existence witness the two suns once again. Goodbye. Goodbye. For the first time, Tectones spoke shortly, and only one word. The time of the ancients is gone. Now, it is the era of mortals, of humans and beasts. May your world be better than the one we built, or perhaps be the one that should have been. Talos will watch over you. Our end is your beginning, Maturs said faintly, the red eyes flickering and dimming in the visor. Ignires cackled in amusement and felt like he might shed tears if he were human. He had never felt so alive at this moment of death. Despite his flames weakening and dying out, he could feel something greater than himself starting to burn so brightly in his sight and renewing his spirit. Strangely, dying for such flames was worth fading into the annals of the misbegotten past and made him feel alive. Ah, he wished he had but a little more time to live and witness their rise. But as the last flickers of ember crackled and flaked off his flaming head, he knew his death was here. Never let those flames die out. Burn brighter than anyone has in all of history. Goodbye, my boy. Ignires whispered out and faded out of existence, dying with a non-existent smile. Oscar woke up and gasped, staring at the ceiling. He raised his head and looked around, seeing no one else besides Erden. Memories flooded his mind and replayed what had happened during his trek down the gray mists. He witnessed Tectones intruding and helping and listened to the farewells of all three before they passed away. You three going on and leaving it all to me. He stood up and looked at the empty throne, at the patch of charred ground, and at the pile of rubble behind him, chuckling. Thank you, and I promise, I won't let Talos fall. Its people and beasts will prosper as intended. This power. He lowered his head and glanced at his hands before clenching them. Even after being told he would receive their essence and power, becoming an ancient in human form, he lacked a single clue of what it meant, and he still didn't know. This power lurking underneath his skin, buried in his bones, was so foreign yet felt natural at the same time. He expected to explode into 1,000 pieces at any moment from the weight of such power. But he felt he was capable of anything and could withstand the harshest the world could throw at him. It was as if his very existence was a contradiction, human and ancient, moral and eternal, frailty and supreme. He was taken aback for a moment and only snapped his head toward Erden after hearing a loud roar. "You haven't changed, Erden. Neither did you, Oscar. But it's strange. I feel it too," Erden said. Oscar gazed up at the ceiling and finally peered past the floors and ceilings of stone, gems, and marble, spotting Avril, his children, Orin, the others, and the Carolumen. Putting on a fresh set of Volton's white robes, he strode toward the exit. "Let's go, Erden. We have a war to finish."